Hey, good morning. I wanted to start off this morning by reading to you guys about Paul and his thorn. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, I'm going to start in probably verse 9. It says, "But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, and in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Um, Previous to chapter or to verse 9 there, kind of at the beginning of chapter 12, you see Paul pleads with Christ about 3 different times for Christ to remove this thorn. And in verse 9, the Lord speaks and says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Then if you look right below that in verse 10, Paul kind of has that aha moment. And he realizes that in his weakness, he delights in his weakness, because in that weakness, that's when Christ is so strong. And at that point in his life, he kind of starts to delight in insults and in hardships and in persecutions and in difficulties and in things that we don't necessarily care to delight in. But he does that because he realizes that at that point he is made strong through Christ. My commentary in my Bible on that particular section of Scripture says that when we are strong in our abilities or in our resources, we are tempted to try to do God's work on our own, and that leads to pride. When we are weak, allowing God to fill us with His power, then we are stronger than we could ever have been on our own. We see time after time God showing His strength and the weakness of His people when they're at their weakest points. I've heard the mountaintop analogy used several different times over my life, and as I kind of grow in my Christian walk and in my Christian faith, I tend to really kind of look back on my life and see periods of great growth that kind of lead to a climb of the mountain, if you will, to a mountaintop experience that's quickly followed by a valley experience, and typically that comes from pride. It's in the valleys or our weakest points when we draw so near to God. We grow there, we flourish there. If you look at the Rocky Mountains, for instance, there's a line, and then above that line, there's nothing. It's arid. There's nothing growing there. It's rocky. Below that particular line, and down into the valleys, you see these lush, beautiful meadows. You see the aspen trees. You see things flourishing. And our lives are no different, and I think that's just because we tend to cling to God in our moments of weakness, and that's what Paul's talking about here. Once we've been in that valley, we've kind of come through it. He's brought us to it. He's brought us through it. We start back the other side of the valley, up the mountaintop. We tend to, either by words or actions, kind of take God and put Him on a shelf, because at that point, we've got it, right? We've got it all figured out. We're good to go. And at that point, our growth kind of staggers. Stagnation sets in. Pride flourishes. Our flesh kicks into overdrive. All of a sudden, we may not necessarily say it, but we think we know better than what the creator of the universe does. We look around and all of a sudden one day feel lonely and isolated and disconnected, either from brothers and sisters, or even from the Lord. And we quickly realize that He's still there. He's never left us. He's longing to provide, longing to love, longing to be that same God that He was yesterday, today, and that He'll be, forever. This is why when we are weak, He is strong. This is why Paul really boasted about his weakness. This is why Paul was an extremely transparent person. If you're around me long enough, you'll hear me tattle on myself. I love to try to be transparent, because the more lowly I can try to make myself feel, and in my weakness I can show His strength. And I'm not bragging. I'm just that's kind of the demeanor that I try to take. It's a challenge that I set before myself every day. That's why Paul was vulnerable, because he knew that God could not and that God would not coexist with the pride of men. So the more lowly, the more weak, feeble, the more downtrodden that he could be, he knew that Christ's strength would shine through that. So my challenge for you guys today, and for me, it's a challenge that I pray for myself, on a daily basis, is that today I decrease, and therefore God will increase. So today, really focus on that, and let that be your prayer today. Pray that God helps you to decrease so that He can increase. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what others see in you. And it's all about that example that we're putting out there for others to see. And so you guys have a great day. And always remember that in your weakness, He is strong. Have a wonderful day.